I never believed anything could look at me without fear until the night a retired K-9 refused to look away. The rain traced slow lines down the floor to ceiling windows of my penthouse, turning the city into blurred gold and shadow beneath me. I stood there with a glass in my hand, untouched ice melted into nothing, just like everything else in my life. Money, power, control, all of it meant I could buy silence but not peace. My name is Adrian Volkov, and people like me don't collect second chances, we eliminate them. But 3 months ago I did something no one in my world understood. I signed papers that transferred ownership of every retired K-9 unit within a 100-mile radius. Dogs that had served and been discarded, dogs labeled unstable, unpredictable, broken. Men around me thought it was a publicity stunt, something soft, something stupid. I let them think that because the truth was harder to explain. I didn't do it for image, I did it because I understood what it meant to be used and then forgotten. The first truck arrived at 2:17 in the morning, engines low, headlights cutting through the fog like questions I didn't want to answer. Cages lined up, metal against metal, each one holding a story no one bothered to hear. They didn't bark, they didn't whine, they just watched, calculating, waiting, like they were deciding if I was worth trusting or worth ignoring. I walked past them slowly, shoes echoing on concrete, tailored coat untouched by the cold. My men stayed back, they always do. Distance is respect in my world, but one cage made me stop. German Shepherd, older than the rest, muscles still there but worn like a memory. His file clipped to the side said Rex, 12 years, retired due to behavioral concerns. Do not approach without restraint. I opened the cage anyway, no hesitation, no command, just instinct. He stepped out, measured, steady, not aggressive, not submissive, just present. His eyes met mine and didn't move, no fear, no challenge, just something I couldn't name, something that made the room feel quieter, like the world had paused to see what I would do next. Any other animal would have lowered its head, any other creature would have reacted to the weight of who I am, but Rex didn't. He stood there like I was just another man breathing the same air. I felt something shift, small but undeniable, like a crack in glass that had never been touched before. I didn't reach for him, didn't speak, didn't need to. We just stood there, two beings who had survived different wars and somehow ended up in the same silence. Behind me one of my men cleared his throat, waiting for orders, always waiting. I didn't look away from Rex when I spoke. Make sure they're all fed. Separate them by temperament and no restraints unless absolutely necessary. Confusion rippled through the room. They expected control, they expected dominance. I gave them something else, I gave them space, because something about these dogs told me they didn't need to be owned, they needed to be understood. Rex turned slightly, then walked past me like he already knew where he belonged, and for the first time in years I followed something instead of leading it. I told myself it didn't mean anything, just another decision, just another night. But as the doors closed and the rain kept falling, I realized something uncomfortable, something I couldn't ignore. He wasn't afraid of me, and somehow that felt more dangerous than anything else I had ever faced. I have seen men pretend to be loyal, but I have never seen silence hold so much meaning until that dog chose to stay without being asked. The estate changed after that night, not louder, not busier, just different, like something invisible had shifted beneath the surface, the kind of shift you feel before a storm, even when the sky looks clear. I walked through the lower wing just past sunrise, the air still carrying that cold edge from the night before. Rows of kennels lined the walls, each one occupied, each one quiet, too quiet for animals that had once been trained to respond to every command, every sound, every signal. They watched me the same way they had on the first night, not with fear, not with obedience, but with awareness, like they were measuring something deeper than authority. I slowed my steps, letting the sound of my shoes fade into the concrete, because something told me noise did not belong here anymore, not the kind I was used to. Rex was not in his kennel. I noticed that immediately before I noticed anything else. The door was open, latch untouched, no signs of struggle, no sign that anyone had forced it open, which meant only one thing: he had left because he chose to, not because he was allowed. I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, not anger, not concern, something sharper, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. I turned to one of my men standing near the entrance, his posture straight, eyes forward, waiting for instruction. Like always. Did anyone move that dog? I asked, my voice calm, too calm. He shook his head. No sir, no one has gone near him since last night. I held his gaze for a second, longer than necessary, not because I doubted him but because I needed to understand why. That answer unsettled me more than any lie could have. I moved deeper into the corridor, scanning each shadow, each corner, every detail, exactly the way I would in any situation that required control. But this was different. This was not about threat, this was about absence, and somehow that felt more dangerous. Rex, I said quietly, not a command, not even a call, just his name spoken into a space that did not belong to me. The response came from behind me, soft, measured footsteps. I turned slowly, not because I was afraid but because something in me already knew he was there. Rex stood at the end of the hallway, watching me the same way he had the first time, steady, unshaken, like he had never left at all. He walked toward me without hesitation. No leash, no handler, no signal guiding him, just intention. When he stopped a few feet away, he did not sit, he did not lower his head, he simply stayed there like he had chosen that exact distance for a reason. I studied him for a long moment, taking in every detail, the scar along his ear, the way his breathing remained, even the way his eyes never broke contact, and then I realized something that made the room feel smaller. He was not waiting for permission, he was waiting for understanding. I exhaled, slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing just enough to notice it. You are not like the others, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them, not because I needed to speak, but because silence suddenly felt too heavy. Rex tilted his head slightly, not submissive, not curious, just aware, like he had heard something in my voice that even I did not recognize, and in that moment something settled into place, a quiet, unspoken agreement, not ownership, not control, something else, something I had never built with anyone in my world before, trust not given, not demanded, just formed in the space between two beings who had nothing left to prove. I turned and walked toward the exit, expecting him to stay where he was, but I heard it again, those same steady footsteps behind me, not rushed, not hesitant, just there, and for the first time in years I did not tell anything to follow me. I let it happen, and that was when I understood the difference between loyalty that is forced and loyalty that is chosen. One obeys, the other stays, and something told me that choice would change everything. Silence is how truth moves when no one is watching, and I started noticing it everywhere. After Rex chose to walk beside me, the estate looked the same on the surface, guards in position, schedules running with precision, doors opening and closing on time, but underneath something felt misaligned, like a clock ticking just slightly off rhythm, and once you hear it you cannot unhear it. I stepped into my office just before noon, sunlight cutting across the floor in sharp lines, the city stretching out beyond the glass like it owed me something it never could deliver. Rex stopped at the doorway. He did not enter, not because he was told not to, but because he understood boundaries better than most men I had worked with. I sat down slowly, placing both hands on the desk, not reaching for anything, not checking anything, just listening. There it was again, that subtle pause and movement outside the room, footsteps that stopped a second too early, voices that lowered just before I passed by. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone could point to, but enough for me to feel it building like pressure behind a wall. I glanced toward Rex. He was already looking at the door, ears slightly angled, body still but alert, not tense, just aware, the way someone becomes when they are waiting for something specific, something they cannot yet see. I leaned back in my chair, watching him instead of the screens, instead of the reports, because something told me he was reading the room more honestly than any information I could gather. What do you hear? I asked quietly, knowing he would not answer, but asking anyway because the question felt necessary. Rex did not move, his gaze remained fixed, and then slowly he shifted his weight one step forward, then stopped again, not advancing, not retreating, just marking the moment like he had reached a line. Only he could see. My phone buzzed once on the desk, a message from one of my men, routine update, nothing unusual, at least that is what the word said, but I have learned that the most dangerous things rarely announce themselves clearly. I picked up the phone, read it once, then set it back down without replying, because instinct told me to wait, to observe, to let the truth reveal itself instead of forcing it. Rex exhaled softly, a sound so quiet most people would have missed it, but I did not. I felt it like a signal, like confirmation that something unseen had just shifted. I stood up, walking toward the door slowly, not rushing, not reacting, just moving with intention, and when I opened it, the hallway looked exactly the same as it always had, clean, quiet, controlled, but I noticed one thing immediately, one guard missing from his usual position, not replaced, not explained, just gone. I did not ask, I did not call anyone over, I simply stood there taking in the absence, because absence tells a story louder than presence ever could. Rex stepped forward, now standing beside me, closer than before, not invading space, just choosing proximity, like he understood that whatever was unfolding had already begun. I looked down at him for a brief second, then back at the empty spot in the hallway, and for the first time in a long time I did not feel in control. I felt aware, and there is a difference. Control assumes, awareness listens, and in that moment I knew something inside my world was no longer what it seemed, and the only one who noticed before I did was the one creature who had nothing to gain by lying. The moment something disappears without explanation is the moment you stop trusting everything that remains, and I have built my entire life on reading what others ignore. I stood there a second longer than necessary, staring at the empty position in the hallway, letting the silence stretch until it said something useful. Rex did not move beside me, not even an inch, but I could feel his focus sharpen, like he had already drawn a line between what was normal and what was not. I stepped forward slowly, not calling for anyone, not signaling alarm, because panic is loud, and whatever this was, it had been careful, quiet. Deliberate, the kind of mistake that only happens when someone thinks they will not be noticed. I walked down the corridor past doors that opened into rooms filled with order, men who nodded when I passed, eyes forward, posture perfect, nothing out of place except the absence behind me growing heavier with every step. I stopped near the security panel mounted into the wall, brushed my fingers across the screen, pulling up the live feed. Cameras covered every angle, every inch of this estate. Nothing moved. Without my knowledge, or at least that is what I had always believed. The footage loaded, clean, smooth, continuous. I rewound it 30 minutes, then an hour, then 2 hours, watching the same hallway, the same guard in position, until suddenly he was not there. No exit, no shift change, no recorded movement, just gone, like he had stepped out of reality itself. I felt it then, that quiet tightening in my chest, not fear, not anger, something more precise. Something that told me this was not an accident. Rex shifted slightly behind me, his nails tapping once against the floor, a small sound but intentional. I turned just enough to catch him in my peripheral vision, his gaze not on me, not on the hallway, but on the camera above us, the one that had just failed to show me the truth. You see it too, I said under my breath, and for a second I almost expected him to answer, not with words but with certainty, because that is what he had been giving me since the moment he arrived. Certainty without noise. I turned back to the screen, replaying the moment again, slower this time, frame by frame, until I noticed it, a flicker so brief it would have been dismissed by anyone not looking for it, a shadow where there should not have been one, a delay where movement should have been continuous. Something had interfered, not with force, not with disruption, but with precision, the kind of precision that comes from someone who understands systems from the inside. I straightened up, letting the screen go dark, because I had seen enough, not everything but enough, to know this was not random and not external. This came from within my walls, within my structure, within the circle I had built and trusted without question. Rex stepped closer now, not crossing into my space, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence, grounding, steady, unaffected by the weight of what I was realizing. I looked down at him for a brief second, then back down the hallway where everything looked exactly the same as before, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. There is someone here, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, someone who knows how to disappear without leaving a trace. Rex did not react, he did not need to, because in that moment I understood something I had ignored for too long. The most dangerous threat is not the one that breaks in, it is the one that already belongs. And as I stood there in the middle of a place I controlled completely, I realized for the first time control is only an illusion when the wrong person learns how to stand inside it without being seen. Trust is not broken in loud moments, it erodes quietly until one day you realize you have been standing on something hollow the entire time. I walked away from the security panel without giving a single order, not because I did not have one, but because the moment you show awareness the game changes, and whoever is hiding inside my walls would adjust before I could see their next move. Rex followed again, his pace steady, matching mine without looking for direction, and that bothered me more than it should have, because it meant he was not reacting to me, he was reacting to something deeper, something I was only beginning to understand. I took the long route through the estate, not the direct path back to my office. Corridors curved through private wings, past rooms that few people were allowed to enter, every step measured, every glance controlled. I nodded at the men stationed along the way, reading their posture, their breathing, the small details that separate loyalty from performance. Most of them passed the test, but one hesitation, one fraction of a second too slow in returning eye contact, stayed with me like a loose thread. I did not pull it yet, not here, not now. Rex slowed as we passed that point, his head turning slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough for me to see that he had marked it too. I kept walking, because patterns reveal themselves only when you let them unfold naturally, force them and they disappear. I reached the lower courtyard where the K9 units were being rotated for feeding. The air smelled different there, less controlled, more real. Handlers moved carefully, giving space, respecting boundaries, something I had ordered without explaining why, because control through fear does not work on something that has already survived it. Rex stepped ahead of me for the first time, not leading, not disobeying, just choosing a direction. He moved toward the far end of the yard where the older units were kept, the ones considered least reliable, least predictable. I followed without calling him back, watching the way the other dogs reacted, not with chaos, not with aggression, but with attention, like something in his presence aligned them without command. He stopped near the fence, nose low, not searching randomly but focusing on a specific spot along the ground. I stepped closer, crouching slightly. The concrete there looked untouched, but I noticed it then, a faint scuff mark, not fresh but not old either. Something had been moved recently, something light, something deliberate. I ran my fingers across it, feeling the difference in texture, a shift too subtle for most to notice, but enough for me. Rex exhaled again, that same quiet signal, as if confirming what I was seeing. This was not about a missing guard, this was about movement within a space that should have remained untouched. I stood slowly, scanning the Perimeter cameras mounted above angles covering every inch, and yet I already knew they had missed something, or worse, they had been made to miss it. I looked back at Rex, his eyes steady locked on mine, and in that moment I understood something I could not ignore anymore. He was not just observing, he was guiding, not with commands, not with force, but with presence, with awareness, with a kind of honesty I had never seen in any human I had trusted. "We are not looking in the right places," I said quietly, the words settling heavier than I expected, because for the first time I was not leading the search. I was following something that could not speak but somehow saw clearer than I did. And as the wind moved through the courtyard carrying a silence that felt too intentional, I realized the person hiding inside my world was not just careful, they were patient, and patience is something I know very well because it is the one weapon that never fails when used correctly. Patience does not reveal truth, it waits for truth to expose itself, and I have learned that forcing answers only teaches people how to hide better. I stayed in the courtyard longer than necessary, not because I needed more evidence but because I needed to understand the rhythm of this place again, the natural flow before it was altered. Rex did not move from the spot he had chosen, his focus fixed not on the ground anymore but beyond it, toward the outer perimeter where the fence met the service corridor, a place rarely used, a place too ordinary to matter, which made it exactly the kind of place someone careful would choose. I straightened slowly, letting my gaze follow his without making it obvious to anyone watching, because now I was certain someone was watching, not through cameras, not through systems, but directly observing, waiting, measuring my reactions the same way I had measured others for years. I turned away from the fence, deliberately breaking the line of attention, because sometimes the only way to see what is hidden is to pretend you have already missed it. Rex hesitated for half a second, then followed, not confused, not resistant, just adjusting, like he understood the strategy without needing explanation. I walked back toward the main structure, my pace, even my posture relaxed, nothing about me signaling that anything had changed. Men passed by offering routine updates, routine respect, routine presence, and I accepted it all without question, without interruption, because disruption would alert the wrong person, and I needed them comfortable. I needed them believing they were still unseen. Inside the building the air felt different again, controlled, filtered, predictable, but beneath that something lingered, something that did not belong, like a scent carried in from outside that no one else noticed. I paused near the central staircase, not looking up, not looking down, just standing still long enough for the environment to respond. Footsteps above slowed slightly, a door closed too quietly, a conversation ended mid-sentence, small things insignificant on their own but together forming a pattern I had seen before. Rex stopped beside me, closer than usual, his body angled just slightly toward the upper level, not tense, not alarmed, just aware. I followed that direction with my eyes casually, as if I were simply considering my next step, but in that brief glance I saw it, a figure at the far end of the second floor, turning the corner. Just as my attention reached them, not running, not hiding, just leaving at the exact moment that avoided confirmation, too precise, too controlled. I did not react, I did not call out, I simply turned and began walking up the stairs, each step measured, each movement deliberate. Rex moved ahead, this time not fast, not urgent, just certain, like he had already accepted where we were going. The second floor felt quieter than the rest of the estate. Not empty, just restrained, like sound itself was being held back. I reached the corridor where I had seen the figure, but there was no one there. Doors closed, lights steady, everything in place except the feeling that something had just slipped out of reach. Rex stopped halfway down the hall, his head lifting slightly, his attention fixed on one door among many identical doors, no markings, no distinction, just another part of a system designed to appear uniform. I walked toward it slowly, my hand hovering near the handle, but not touching it yet, because something told me this moment mattered more than any decision I had made so far, not because of what was behind the door but because of what it represented, a line between what I thought I controlled and what had already begun to move without me. I looked down at Rex one last time, his eyes steady, unblinking, and in that silence I understood he was not waiting for me to act, he was waiting for me to realize that whatever was behind that door had been there long before I started looking, and the only reason I was seeing it now was because something that could not speak had refused to ignore it. I have opened doors before without hesitation, but this one felt different, like the answer behind it had been waiting longer than I had been searching. I let my hand rest on the handle for a second, not gripping, not pushing, just feeling the stillness around it. Rex did not move beside me, his presence steady like an anchor in a place that suddenly felt unfamiliar. I turned the handle slowly, no rush, no force, just intention. The door opened without resistance, revealing a room that looked ordinary at first glance, a small office, desk, chair, file cabinets, everything placed with careful precision, nothing out of order, nothing disturbed. But something about it felt staged, like a scene arranged to appear untouched. I stepped inside, taking one measured step after another, letting my eyes move across the details instead of jumping to conclusions, because the truth never reveals itself to impatience. Rex followed but stopped just inside the doorway, not entering fully, as if respecting a boundary even I had not recognized yet. I moved toward the desk, running my fingers lightly across the surface. No dust, no signs of long-term disuse, which meant someone had been here recently, not hours ago, not days ago, but regularly, the kind of regular that blends into routine. I opened the top drawer slowly. Inside were files neatly stacked, labeled in clean, precise handwriting, names, dates, assignments, nothing unusual until I noticed one detail. Every file was accounted for except one space, a gap too exact to be accidental, like something had been removed with purpose, not haste. I closed the drawer gently, my mind already moving ahead, connecting patterns that were no longer separate: the missing guard, the blind spot in the cameras, the scuff near the courtyard, and now this, a room that existed inside my system without ever drawing attention. Rex shifted slightly, his gaze now fixed on the far wall. I followed it and saw what he had seen, not immediately but after a second longer than I would have liked. A panel not part of the original design, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I stepped closer, examining it. The edges too clean, the alignment too perfect. This was not added by an outsider, this was built into the structure by someone who had access, someone who understood not just the layout but the logic behind it. I pressed lightly against the surface and felt it give just enough to confirm what I already knew. This was not a hiding place, this was a passage, a way to move without being seen, without being recorded, without being questioned. I pulled my hand back, not opening it yet, because the moment I did the game would shift completely and I was not ready to show that I had found it. Rex looked up at me then, not questioning, not urging, just present as always, and in that moment I understood something I had missed from the beginning. This was never about someone hiding from me, this was about someone operating within my world without ever needing to reveal themselves, and the only reason I was standing here now was because something that had no reason to trust me had chosen to stay long enough to make me see what I had been blind to all along. I have learned that the most dangerous truths are not hidden behind walls, they are hidden behind timing, and the moment you think you are ready to see them is usually the moment you are already late. I stood there in that quiet room, my hand no longer on the panel but the awareness of it still pressing against my thoughts like a weight that refused to lift. Rex did not move, he never rushed moments like this, and somehow that steadiness forced me to slow down as well, because whatever this was, it had been here longer than my suspicion, longer than my attention, and rushing now would only expose what I had just begun to understand. I turned away from the panel deliberately, scanning the room again, not for what was obvious but for what felt slightly out of place. The chair angled just a few degrees off center, the pen on the desk positioned too precisely parallel to the edge, the faint impression on the carpet where something had been moved repeatedly. These were not mistakes, they were habits, and habits belong to people, not accidents. I walked back toward the desk, opening the drawer again, this time paying attention to the details I had ignored before. The files were labeled in consistent handwriting except for one folder near the back, the ink slightly darker, the pressure uneven, like it had been written with hesitation or intention to disguise itself. I pulled it out slowly, placing it on the desk and opening it with the same care I had used for everything else. Inside were records, not of operations, not of transactions, but of movement schedules, patterns of guard rotations, camera blind spots, timing sequences, everything mapped out with precision that mirrored my own systems. Only this was not my work, this was someone studying my structure from within, learning it, adapting to it, improving upon it. I felt it. Then that quiet realization settling deeper than anything before. This was not an intruder, this was a shadow built from my own design. Rex stepped closer, this time not stopping at the doorway but entering fully for the first time since we had arrived, his presence shifting the air in the room, grounding it in a way that made everything feel more real, more immediate. He moved toward the wall where the panel was hidden, his nose lowering slightly, not searching randomly but confirming what we already knew. I followed, standing beside him again, my eyes resting on that seamless surface, and for a moment I did nothing, because sometimes understanding is more powerful than action, and I needed to understand completely before I moved forward. I thought about the missing guard, the camera flicker, the path in the courtyard, the figure on the second floor, all of it connected not through chaos but through control. Someone had built a second system inside mine, not to destroy it but to move through it unseen. And the only question left was why. I exhaled slowly, reaching toward the panel again, this time not hesitating, not questioning, because the line had already been crossed the moment I became aware. I pressed against it and felt the mechanism respond, subtle, quiet, precise. The wall shifted just enough to reveal a narrow passage behind it, darkness stretching forward like a path that had been walked many times before but never acknowledged. I did not step in, not yet. Instead I stood there looking into it while Rex remained beside me, steady as always, and in that silence I realized something that changed everything. This was not the beginning of a threat, this was the middle of a story that had been unfolding without me, and if I stepped into that passage I would not just be finding the truth, I would be stepping into a version of my world where I was no longer the one who understood all the rules. I have walked into darkness before, but this was the first time I knew it had been waiting for me long before I ever thought to look for it. I stood at the edge of that hidden passage, feeling the weight of a decision that could not be undone, because once you step into something like this you are no longer observing, you are participating. Rex did not hesitate. He stepped forward just enough to stand at the threshold, his body aligned with mine, not leading, not following, just there, like he had already accepted whatever came next. I took one slow step into the passage, the air immediately cooler, quieter, like sound itself had been reduced to something distant. The walls narrow, not unfinished but intentionally minimal, designed for movement, not comfort, every detail calculated. I moved forward carefully, my steps measured, not out of fear but out of respect for the fact that this space was not built by accident. It was designed by someone who understood my world well enough to move through it without being seen. Rex stayed close, his presence steady, his attention forward, not scanning randomly but focused, like he already knew the path mattered more than the destination. The passage curved slightly, then opened into a larger hidden room, one I had never seen on any blueprint, never approved, never questioned, because I had never known it existed. I stepped inside slowly, letting my eyes adjust, taking in what surrounded me. Screens dark but ready, cables organized, documents stacked not in chaos but in order. A second control center, not to replace mine but to mirror it, to observe it, to understand it from a distance. I moved closer to the main console, running my fingers lightly across the surface, feeling the faint warmth of recent use. This was not abandoned, this was active. Someone had been here not long ago, watching, learning, adapting. I looked at the screens, then at the files, then at the space itself, and the realization settled deeper than anything before. This was not sabotage, this was preparation. Someone had been studying my system, not to destroy it but to master it. Rex moved toward a small table in the corner, his nose lowering slightly, then stopping, his focus fixed on something I had not yet seen. I followed his gaze, and there it was, a single photograph, placed deliberately, not hidden, not displayed, just present enough to be found when the time was right. I picked it up slowly, my eyes narrowing as recognition hit, not sudden, not shocking but inevitable, like a memory resurfacing after years of being buried. It was a man, older, strong posture, steady eyes, someone I had seen before, not in passing, not in business, but in a moment that had defined something I chose to forget, a moment where a decision had been made that changed the course of two lives. I did not speak, I did not react outwardly, but inside something shifted, something I could not ignore anymore. Rex looked up at me, his gaze steady as always, and in that silence I understood he had not led me here by instinct, he had led me here because this was the truth I had avoided, the one place where my past had not disappeared but evolved. And as I stood there holding that photograph in a room I never knew existed, I realized something that changed everything. This was never about someone hiding inside my world, this was about someone building a new one within it, and the only reason I had finally found it was because something that had every reason to leave had chosen to stay long enough to show me that I was not the only one who remembered.